comes from Genesis 28, verses 10 through 22. And Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there that night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south, and in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head, and he set up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the name of the place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I will come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you.
Morning, my name is David Black. I'm the campus pastor here, and I just want to welcome you as Christmas is approaching to Grace Church. If you are a guest with us, if you're new, if you're just visiting family, something we say here, and we mean it, is that we believe that we live to make Jesus make sense. And that's not necessarily because we think that he doesn't make sense, but sometimes our world doesn't make sense, and translating those things can be difficult. I was thinking about that this week. Quick confession. Some of you already know this, and it was significant, so I'm going to talk about it. I went to the dentist this week for the first time in 10 years. And I said, hey, man, I haven't been here in forever. And you know what the dentist said to me? He said, welcome back. And that was it. And I was like, man, dentists and pastors are similar in that people often don't show up until things are painful, or it's been a while. And I really think the only appropriate thing to say if you haven't been to church in a while, or if you've been wondering what it's going to be like if I walk in, is there going to be judgment? Is there going to be all those things? Is just welcome back. Welcome back. So if you're new, if it's your guest, if it's your first time in a long time, or if you were here last week, just want to say welcome back to you. It's our hope that you could explore Jesus here if you're not a follower of him, and if you are a follower of him, that you would meet him here. And so we do that every week in a lot of different ways, and we're going to jump into the second week of a series entitled Heaven and Nature Sing, as it leads up to Christmas time. Before we do, real quick, I would just point out that tonight, you're going to hear about it later in the announcements, but tonight we have a remembrance service. It's a service set aside that recognizing the holidays are hard for people who have lost others. And so if that's you, if that's a friend of yours, and you're just like, hey, I've been looking for a place to go with them and just be, we don't make you do anything, we don't make you say anything. It's just acknowledging the absence of someone, which you feel already. Right? And it's good to do that together. It's good to recognize that the world is not the way it ought to be, and that the way that we see things now is not the way they will always be. And so if you're willing to do that with others, I'd invite you tonight, come for a little, stay the whole time, leave early, whatever you want to do. No one's going to call you out for it. But if you've got somebody in your life, it's a great opportunity to connect them. Well, we are in the second week, as I said, of a series entitled Heaven and Earth, or Heaven and Nature Sing. And the reason we entitled it that is because this time of year, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, the world in which we live, our culture in which we live, in fact, many cultures for which we have on the globe at Christmas time, focus their attention in the same direction. And so church people and non-church people and followers of Jesus and non-followers of Jesus and like cultural pop icons and all kinds of people, all heaven and nature seems to focus its attention at Christmas time to this same place. And we said that that's significant because it's not often that actually heaven and earth meet in the same spot. That's kind of what Christmas is. It's kind of what's the significance of. In fact, ways that we talk about that and the way that the people who have followed not only the Christian God, but other gods would think about that is there was a practice that they would do to signify this is a place or this is a person in which heaven and nature meet. And that practice is the ancient practice of anointing. In fact, if you read the Bible ever, you'll find this thing happening. And to anoint something, here's the definition. To anoint is to set apart for God's power and presence. And so all throughout the Bible, here's what you see, that when they find a person like a king and they go, we want heaven and nature to meet here, God's power and presence to be here, they'll anoint the king or the queen. They'll anoint places, which we'll see today as well. They anoint all kinds of stuff throughout the Bible. And they do this and saying, here is where, at least for a moment, or here's where our hope is, and here's what we promise, or we're saying when we do this, that heaven and earth meet right here. You say, well, why does that matter around Christmas? Well, because the word for anointing in the Bible is this word here, Christ, or Christma. It's where we get our word Christ from. The word Christ literally means anointed one. So here's what we're celebrating at Christmas. We are celebrating the anointing of one individual. And we're saying this person is the place in which heaven and nature meet. This concept is probably not new for you. In fact, even if you're not a follower of Jesus, you'll often hear people talk about meeting God in certain places. In fact, the text that we read today, the word place shows up 6 different times. Right? And he wakes up, and this guy named Jacob, who we'll talk about in a second, he actually has a stone, and what he does is he has a dream, but he takes a stone and he pours oil on it. He anoints it and goes, this stone is where heaven and nature meet. It's where God seems to be. Again, in our culture, we kind of think through this differently. And so I just threw some pictures up of places where if you're not a follower of Jesus, or even if you are, you'll hear people talk about where they meet with God or connect with God is a better place, or a better word maybe in our culture. So nature, okay? I don't know if you've ever been out in nature. Some people who are not even nature people, when they get out in nature, they're going, I need to be a nature person, right? Some of you are like, I wish I was a nature person, but bugs, or whatever, like, that's kind of where you're going, I connect with God in the solitude and the time away in maybe all of the natural world. For others, it's maybe an experience of music. Maybe for you, that's why you like music, because it kind of takes you somewhere else. And you just say like, man, I feel like I connect with God in music. Another place might be a temple or a church or a building, right? There might be something in your life. Maybe you grew up going to Mass. Maybe you grew up going to a temple. Maybe for you, the place in which God and you connected was a certain spot, a location. Google has an address for that, right, for you. And you're like, oh, that's kind of it. Or maybe for you, you're somebody who's like, man, when I work out, yeah, I just meet God. See? Yeah. Like, some of us work out trying to be God, but others of us meet God when we're working out, right? Some of us are looking for other things when we're working out, maybe God's man or woman for us, but many of us go to the gym and work out because we're going, it's solitude, it's time away, but here's what we're saying when we say that as a culture. And here's what I want you to see today. That when we say that, what we're really talking about, all these places and what we'll see Jacob talking about in a second, is that these are really just a bridge. We're saying there's a place or a bridge that somehow makes heaven and nature or earth meet. Because we think and we intrinsically somehow know that those things are separated most of the time. And we say, oh, here's a place where I have, quote unquote, built a bridge, or someone else is building a bridge for me to connect with God. And here's what I want you to see, that today, what we're going to take a look at in this text is that in this story, it's not Jacob who's building a bridge, it's God who's building a bridge, but Jacob thinks it's the rock, okay? And we're going to walk our way through that and find out what's really going on. But here's why I think this matters, and as I was thinking about this week, here's kind of my prayer for us as we look at this text this morning. I think for most of us, there's probably some of us in this room for whom when we talk about meeting with God, it's kind of a mystery. And maybe that's kind of what you mean when you say meet with God. Like I go out in nature and there's some mysterious thing happening, right? Or like, I don't know, maybe it's just never really made sense. I don't know why it works or why people think it works. For others of us, when we talk about meeting with God, it's a memory. Like it happened at a time and I've been trying to get back to that place. Maybe some of us in this room, we even grew up as adults and we had something experienced when we were a child or as a kid growing up that we felt was like actually God talking with us, or maybe you don't put a name to it, words to it, but it's a time in your life. And maybe as an adult, even with kids of your own now, maybe you're like, I'm just trying to get back to that place. Some of us were trying to recreate that memory. And so for some of us, it's a mystery. For other of us, this bridge or this feeling, it's like just a memory in time that we're trying to recreate. But here's what I think that we'll see from this text, and here's what I think God might be trying to show us today from the Bible, and here's what I hope that you take away. That more than a mystery and more than a memory, that what God is doing at Christmas is he's saying, I would like to meet with you. I would like to meet with you, and I've made a way to meet with you in a manger. That's really what we're celebrating. That Christmas says that the God of the universe has built a bridge through a manger, okay? All right, let's take a look at Jacob and see what we can learn. Here's what I want to do today. I want to walk our way through this text because it's near Eastern ancient literature, and it's nice to see what the author's doing. So we're going to read this together. We're going to go through it, and then I'm just going to talk about some things that I think are applicable for us today. Cool? Okay, so let's read this together. Notice, as Charles read it, it starts with a guy whose name is Jacob. The name Jacob in this text literally means trickster or liar or deceiver. How would you like that to be your name, right? He came out as one of a twin. And his parents were like, he was actually grabbing the heel of the brother. Like they were like wrestling in the womb. And they pulled out one kid and he's like hanging on, right? Some of you are like, I have a brother or sister like that. They're still hanging on. They're like 40 and living with my parents. Anyways, he's holding on. And they go, this guy, he's a little trickster, which is cute when you're little. But as he grew up, he lived into that name. He lived in that name. In fact, here's what you need to know about Jacob. Jacob has spent most of his life defrauding and tricking his family. In fact, right now he is on the run. He is on the run from his older brother because he dressed up like his older brother and tricked his blind dad into giving him half and double portion of the inheritance. So he's like, I know back in that custom, that was the time the older brother was going to get most of it. But he's like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write up a fake contract, more or less. I'm going to go into my blind dad. And I'm going to trick him into giving me what's not mine. And his brother is angry. He's yelling. And so you have one of two brothers, okay? If you grew up in church, one of two brothers, the younger one, who took his father's inheritance and left home and went on a journey, okay? Maybe you remember another story like that. So this guy, Jacob, he's a liar, he's a deceiver. He's never really spoken to God, ever. We don't have him recorded doing that. He's invoked his name in tricking people, but he's on the run. And then we see, by the way, he goes to a certain place. Again, the name place comes up. We're not even told the name of the place, and that's intentional. And as he's in this certain place, the sun is setting. And this is so dramatic, right? This is literally the way the author is writing this to let you understand where he is. He's in the middle of a place that doesn't even have a name. We have a name for places that don't have names. What is it called? Nowhere, right? Somebody said Hiram. No, I'm just kidding. Middle of nowhere. He's in the middle of nowhere. And how much stuff does he have? Nothing. How do you know he doesn't have anything? Well, because he needs a rock for a pillow. How bad do things have to be? If you're like, I need to go to bed, let me find a rock. Literally, he is at rock bottom, okay? So he's got a rock for a pillow, he's been on the run, and he goes to sleep in the middle of nowhere. And then we're told that he has a dream, okay? So he has this dream, and he sees this ladder, or some versions say ramp. I actually think ramp is better. And it's set up on the earth, and the top of it reaches to the heavens. Now, here's what you need to know about the book of Genesis. It's not just a collaboration of a bunch of different stories. It's not just a history. That the author of the book of Genesis, which is the book that we're in, is that he's writing to tell a narrative and a story that says something collectively together. So here's what he wants you to see. When you read the word, the top of it reached to the heaven, you should go, aha. And you should think of another story, which you just read in Genesis chapter 11, if you were to read Genesis. That story has another tower. It's actually the same words borrowed from there and put in here. And so the picture points back to the Tower of Babel. In fact, Genesis chapter 11, verse 4 says this, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top up into the heavens.'" And what they were trying to do there is they're saying, hey, we're going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to reach God. We're going to go up to heaven from earth. So we're going to build this really, really, really tall tower. In fact, some renditions point it this way, which is why when you think about Jacob's dream, we tend to portray it popular in art culture like this, like a ladder, right? Because we're Westerners and we have ladders. The better translation would be ramp or staircase. So some scholars, and I'm pretty convinced, some scholars think that what he saw was this, a ziggurat. It's a ramp. It's a temple. It's a way that ancient people in the Eastern culture would connect with God. They would go to this spot and they would take their sacrifice up the ramp and leave it at the top. Why? Because they're trying to get to a place and a bridge where they would meet with God. But something's interesting in our story. In fact, Jacob says angels are coming down the stairs. It's not people going up. Angels are going down. And so as we keep going, you'll see here that the Lord is there. Okay, the God of the Bible. Not just any God. We're talking about the God of the Bible. And behold, the Lord stood above him. Some versions say above it, but I actually think it should be above him. And we can talk about it later if you want to know why. But he's literally like above him. So it's like God is talking with him. It's the first time God has ever spoken to Jacob. And he says something specifically. He says to them, I am the God of your Abraham, who's his grandfather, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your offspring. And he goes through that whole blue section. You have to understand that what he's repeating to him is a promise that was made unconditionally to his grandfather years before. And up until this point, God has had this conversation with Abraham. God had this conversation with Isaac, his blind father. But never before has he ever had this conversation with Jacob. So God finds him in the middle of nowhere, gives him a dream with a tower and a bridge, and goes, hey, just so you know, the thing that I had with your grandfather and the thing that I had with your dad is now our thing. Well, what does that mean? Well, God tells him. In fact, he says, I am with you. Behold. That's literally the Bible's way of going like, look. Like, look, I'm with you. Like, look. Well, what do you mean? Well, look, stairs, angels, I'm with you. Okay? That's God's presence. And he says, and we'll keep you. That's a fancy way of saying, I got you, right? God's like, my power is with you. I'll keep you wherever you go. Wherever you go. And I'll bring you back to this land. I know you're on the run. I know you're on the way out. I know things have not gone well, and I know it's all your fault. But I'm with you, and I will keep you. And one day, someday, we'll be here again. Okay? God's power and his presence, he's going, I'm with you. Cool. So, Jacob does what most of us would do if we had a dream like that in the middle of nowhere on a rock. He wakes up and he goes, whoa, surely God is in this place. You're like, no joke, Sherlock, right? Like, yes. And he goes, and I didn't know it. It's probably the most true thing Jacob has said in his life. God's here. I didn't know it. And he was afraid. He's afraid. To be honest, just a quick aside, that's how most people are in life when they think about God showing up. Most of us would go, if God showed up, I'd be scared. And you're not wrong. Because most of the people in the Bible, when God shows up, they're afraid. They're like, what? Like, if this really happened to you, you'd have a similar response. And he goes, how awesome is this place? Now, that's not Bill and Ted, like, awesome. You know, this is him going like, whoa, whoa. Bill and Ted is an old reference because I am old, okay? But if you got it, you know. All right, ask somebody older than you with bifocals. Anyways, yep. So early in the morning, right, he's like, God is here. This is none other than the house of God. We'll later learn that word is Bethel. Beth meaning house, El meaning God, and the gate of heaven. Do you know what the gate of heaven is? If you said the gate of God or the God gate, Babel. He's like, I found it. What they were trying to do back then, I got it right here. This is it. They were just building in the wrong spot, right? They had different rocks. They didn't have this rock. I found the place where God lives. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar, and he anoints it. Right? The first time anything is anointed in the Bible, it's not a person, it's a rock. And if you've been to the Middle East, you understand they got a lot of rocks. And he's like, this is it. This is the stone where God lives. I found it. He keeps talking. Look at his response. Think about this. Think about how odd this is. Then Jacob makes a vow saying, I love the way Charles read it, if God will be with me and will keep me in the way that I go and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, you can understand where his priorities are, right? If you slept on a rock last night, you're like, food and clothing would be great. If he gives me food and clothing so that I will come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord, that's the personal name of God, that's why it's all caps, Yahweh, shall be my God. In other words, out of all the gods, this God will be my God. And this stone, my pillow, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house. This is where God lives. And all that you give me, God, I'll give it 10% back to you. Is this weird for anybody? Do you see what's going on? He's like, this is the spot. Did God say, Jacob, you're in my spot? No. God was like, hey man, I'm with you. I'm with you. You're a liar and you're a cheat and you're running away from home for your life. You got nothing but a rock for your pillow. I'm with you. And Jacob's like, God lives here. And you're like, really, man? Right? What does he say? He says, if God's with me. What's he doing? He's still Jacob, right? He's still Jacob. Now, we call this story Jacob's ladder or Jacob's ramp. And quite honestly, I don't think that's the way at all we should look at it. In fact, I think the way that the Bible presents it and what God is trying to do is going like, Jacob, man, I want to show you my bridge. I want to show you my ladder. I'll give you my ramp. God has literally built a bridge to Jacob. And he's going, man, here you go. And so here's what I want to do with the rest of our time. I just want to ask ourselves this question. Why does Jacob, and by the way, Jacob, why do we need this bridge? Why do we need this bridge? Why do we all need to see what Jacob sees? Why do we all need to know what Jacob knows? Why do we all need to hear what God is saying to Jacob? Why is this even in the Bible? Well, I think the first reason is this, is that on our own, we can't see it. On our own, we can't see it. Jacob can't see that God is with him at all. In fact, this isn't Jacob at rock bottom going, oh my goodness, I've ruined my life. Does he say that? Does it say like, Jacob was there and he was feeling really bad and depressed, and so he just said, God, if you're there. No, he didn't even say, God, if you're there. This man has not deconstructed at all. He's destructed his life. A bomb has gone off in his family, and that's the end of it. He is in a physical desert, and he is in a spiritual desert. He's not looking for the God of his fathers. He's not interested in the God of his fathers. He's pretty indifferent to the God of his fathers. Listen, man, today, there are 100 modern deserts that we could find ourselves in. Right? And maybe you're there. Some of us here, you might be in a physical desert. You're going, I don't have anything. I am in the middle of nowhere. I really feel like I just have a rock. You're like, I've come to a place in life where my family's not around. In fact, I'm actually at odds with my family, and I'm running from my family, truth be told. And yeah, I'm not really thinking about God. Maybe you're in a spiritual desert. And you're going, I'm pretty indifferent toward God. He and I have not spoken in a long time. In fact, we've never really talked. Maybe some of you are like, yeah, no, my family had a faith, just like Jacob's family had a faith. And to be honest, I've never really dealt with that. I'm not really planning to. I'm just kind of where I am. Same boat as Jacob. Kind of where you are. Right? For some of us, we go nowhere spiritually and nowhere physical is kind of proof enough to me that God has nothing to say to me. Right? You wouldn't be wrong for thinking that. I think that's where we end up often as people, in a desert. And there's 100 different ways to think about that. But I'm willing to bet some of us are there. You see, what Jacob doesn't know and what he can't see and what the Bible constantly talks about is that no matter where we go and how far we go, God is still there, even in the deserts. Whether we acknowledge him, wrestle with him, ignore him, he's still there. In fact, Psalm 139 says this, where shall I go from your spirit? Where shall I flee from your presence? If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light become about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. I used to tell that to my kids as they were going to bed, and they were scared of the dark. Even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. Jacob's like, I'm in the middle of a desert, and God's like, let me show you where you're at. You're actually at a place where when you see what I show you, you think you're in my house. By the way, the world is mine. It's all my house. That's what he's saying, more or less. It's like, you can't go anywhere. I'm right here. Even though you acknowledge me or not, I am right here. When I was younger, I brought a couple pictures. I got given a shortwave radio. I realize this is ancient history. Mine was not the one on the left, by the way. Mine was this one, which is not any better, quite honestly, as far as technology goes. But a shortwave radio is a radio that allows you to pick up alternate frequencies between FM and AM, which is all I had in my life at a point in time. But somebody said to me, they said, hey, did you know that you could actually hear airplanes talking to one another and that the air traffic in the air if you had a specific radio? And I was like, what? That was so cool to me as a young kid. And they're like, yeah, let me show you. And they gave me a shortwave radio, and they turned it to the right frequency. And sure enough, I heard pilots talking to each other. And it was about as thrilling as math class. But it was cool. I was like, oh, what? Now, what happened? All someone did was demonstrate to me that there was something happening around me that I was unaware of. They didn't start talking when the radio went on. They weren't like, oh, some kid turned on his radio, let's talk. They were always doing that. And for the first time in my life, I actually had something that would pick up on it. And the way the Bible talks about it is that on our own, most of us, we're just doing our own life, right? We don't have the equipment or the technology, and yet God, in his mercy, shows up and turns on a switch at some point and begins to talk to us. Author J.K. Rowling puts it this way. She says, I was set free because my greatest fear had already been, and so rock bottom became the solid foundation. Author Tony Evans, who's a follower of Jesus, puts it this way. He goes, sometimes God lets you hit rock bottom so that you will discover that he is the rock at the bottom, right? Listen, you may have blown up your world, but you didn't blow up God's. You may have blown up your life, but God's like, the world that I have is still intact. And oftentimes we go, it's the end of the world, I've ruined it, and God goes, no, you haven't. I'm still here, and you're still in it. And most of us live our life between believing that somehow God is disinterested in us and distant from us, but he's not. God is not disinterested in you. He's not distant from you. Remember, Jesus shows up, he tells a story about a son who left home and came to his senses and was like, Dad, I'm just going to be a servant. And the dad's like, no, you're not. You're my son. The God of the universe goes, hey, I'm not interested in you being my servants. I want you to be in my family, right? And I think most of us, we live between, I don't want to be bothered by God, and then as we get older, we go, I don't want to bother him. And so somewhere between not being bothered with all that Jesus and religious stuff, and somewhere between life happening and going, oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to bother him, God wants you to know that he's actually interested in you in the desert. And he hasn't gone anywhere. He wants us to see this because we can't see it on our own. Also, like Jacob, by the way, on our own, we can't understand it. That's why we need this bridge. We need this vision of a ladder and a ramp and God coming down it. Because we don't understand it. We don't. Jacob's like, if God will be with me. And God's like, I just said I'd be with you. Right? God, all right. You got it? I'm with you. Got it. I will keep you. Awesome. I'm going to go with you. Awesome. Wherever. Got it. He wakes up. This is the rock. God's like, the angels are probably like, are you kidding? What do we got to do? You're going to write it down? I'm with you. And he goes, let's make a deal, God. I'm going to make a deal with you. I'm going to deal with you on our own. Most of us, listen, and this isn't saying anything about this is how we are as people. Because of our nature and how we're wired, because we're born on the other side of God, we're born separated from God, right? So most of us deal with God on our own terms. That's the way we like it. Like how God and I, we have an arrangement, right? We have an arrangement. It's just how we function. It's a little bit like when I'm reading this text, I think about this, again, another old cultural reference, but Zoolander, anybody seen the movie Zoolander? Okay? If not, you should go see it. It's your homework. Now I got to remember what's in Zoolander. But this scene always stayed with me because they break in and they're trying to get these files and they're like, where are the files? And they're like talking over the radio and like, the files are in the computer. And they go, in the computer. And what do? They pick up the computer, if you've not seen it, they smash it on the ground, and they start sorting through the parts, right, for the files. And they're like, we don't see them. And they're like, no, they're not literal files in the computer, right? Jacob almost does the exact opposite here. And by the way, so do we in life, right? Why? Because the files are digital. They're like out there. They're actually looking for it right here. Most of us think God's like in the cloud, in the ether, out there. And God's going, no, I'm with you. I'm right here. And we go, where are you? And he's like, I'm right here. Where are you? I'm right here. And so Jacob's like, if you'll be with me. And God's like, I'm right here. Right here. Right? We don't understand it on our own. God keeps trying to come close, and we go, too close. Like we're on the train in the Atlanta airport. We're like, too close. Right? God's like, too close. Right? He keeps moving closer, and we keep pushing him away. And we doubt it when God says, I love you. You see, writing to a group of Christians, the Apostle Paul, in a book called Romans, he says this, actually a letter. He says, who shall separate us from the love of Christ, the Anointed One? Shall tribulation, that means difficulty, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or danger, or the sword, that'd mean death for them. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him. What's he saying? He's like saying when God says that he loves you, he means it, whether you love him back or whether you understand it. Right? You ever try to tell someone that you love them and they don't think it's true? You ever try to tell someone, I love you, and they're going, what's the catch? I guess that's Jacob. God's like, hey, I love you. And Jacob's like, if you love me, and if you feed me, and if I get some clothes and I come back, then this rock will be your house. You see where he's at? See? Writing similarly about this, the late, I think he's dead, late great Charlie Daniels. Is he alive? Does anyone know? He died. He's gone. He says this in his song, The Devil Went Down to Georgia. Well, the devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for a soul to steal. He was in a bind because he was way behind. And he was willing to make a deal. So he's looking for this violinist, right? And anyways, the violinist ends up beating the devil, and that's not neither here nor there. But what I want you to say is that there's this trope that's in our culture. It's always been around, even back in Shakespeare and further back, where somehow we believe that there are people, and they make a deal with the devil to kind of get ahead. As a pastor, just to be honest, my biggest concern for you is not that you would make a deal with the devil. I'm not saying you should. I'm not even sure I know how you go about doing that. But my biggest concern is not that you would make a deal with the devil. My biggest concern, and I think the largest danger for you and me, is that we would make a deal with God. That we would say, God, if you bless me, keep me safe, and raise my kids, and nothing bad happens, then I know you love me. God, I promise, I'll never ask a thing ever again. Just please fill in the blank. If you blank, then I will. And the whole history of mankind is us going, God, if you, then will. If you, then will. And God's like, can we just get rid of the conditions? Can we get rid of the conditions? If I'm really good, then you'll love me. No. I loved you before you were good. Right? I love you when you're bad. God, if I show up at church on Sundays, then you and I are close. No, I want to be close to you whether you show up or darken the door of a church building or not. God, if you fix my, then I'll. He's like, look, we can talk about that thing. We can talk about suffering. We can talk about loss. We can talk about your family. We can talk about what that person who said they loved me did in your life. But here's what you need to know about me. God, right? God says this. In the Bible, he does. No one speaks for God but God. And what God says about him is that he loves ungodly people. And Jacob goes, I don't get it. And by the way, neither do you and I. We don't. And here's why. Here's why we need this bridge. Because we can't see it. Man, we can't understand it. But man, on our own, we can't earn it. We can't earn it. when talking about Jacob's ladder, if you Google Jacob's ladder, this is what comes up. This is an exercise machine. I don't think this guy is Jacob, but let's say, for all intents and purposes, he wants to be one day, right? So he's strapped into this never-ending staircase. And for $6,000, by the way, yeah, you could have a Tesla or you could have this, right? Jacob's ladder in your house. And if you had that, you'd be sweating and working and exhausted. And if you're like me, I look at that and go, that's a lot of work. I don't need that ladder to be that tired, right? But that's what that is. And to be honest, that's quite honestly the metaphor for how we think we can get and meet with God. The history of the world's religions and the history of Jacob's life is the way that he understood it is if I work really hard and I do the things, then I meet God. So I'm going to climb the ladder and I'm going to put forth the effort. And spiritually, I'm going to sweat and I'm going to be morally good and faithful. And I'm going to try really hard. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stack all that on top of itself so that I'm finally at the end of my life on top of the ladder. And I'm like, hey, God. And he's like, welcome. That's not how it works. You do that, all you end up is exhausted with a pile of good things going, God, I did all this stuff. Where are you at? Right? That's what they were doing in Babel. We're going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to build a tower that reaches to the heavens. And we're still building. 100 different ways. Career, money, relationships, you name it. We're building. Most of our social media is just, look at what I did. Here we go. Another ladder, another rung up. Boop. And we're like, I like it. You go. You keep building. Good for you. I wish I was you. Like all these things. Trying to get to God where we meet him and look at him in the eye. We put a ton of effort into it. And yet, God goes, Jacob, I want to show you a different bridge. Because in Babel, God's gate, they're trying to go up. In my bridge, I'm coming down. God doesn't live at the top of the mountain. He came down to the bottom. He doesn't live at the top of the ladder. He's jumping rungs to get to the bottom, to meet you and me. In fact, he says that in Romans 3:20. He says, for no one can ever be made right with God by doing what the law commands. The law simply shows us how sinful we are. In other words, if you want to know how much you speed, just drive. Well, there's a speed limit. I'm going 10 over. My kids do this all the time. Hey, Dad. I'm like, I know. They're like, aren't you? Yep. But what? But I live in reality, and we live in Atlanta, and I got to get there, right? Like, that's ridiculous. That's some unattainable standard that nobody does, right? That just tells me how much I'm paying when I get pulled over. Do you know how fast you were going? Kind of, but I'm not telling you, right? That's how we live our life. Hey, do you know what you shouldn't be doing? Yep, but I'm not telling you. I know it. And God's going like, hey, the more we try, the more we realize we can't, and the more we're just like, yeah, I can't do that. And if you think that's the path, that's not the path at all. In fact, Tim Keller puts it this way in his quote. He says this right here. To truly become Christians, followers of Jesus, we must also repent of the reasons we did anything right. Right? God's in Jacob's life, not because Jacob's like, I'm going to earn it. Jacob's like, I'm going to trick my way to the top. And God's like, that's not how it works, man. Right? Jacob would not have been someone who said, I'm at the top. He would have been someone who's like, I think that's the way, but I don't want to do all the work. And God's like, actually, I'm at the bottom, man. I'm here with you. Someone said, hey, what's special about where God shows up to Jacob? And I don't think it's a where question, quite honestly. I think what's significant is the when. When does God show up in Jacob's life? God doesn't show up in Jacob's life when he's dressed up as his brother trying to swindle his dad, which is where you'd think God would show up. Gotcha. Uh-huh. God shows up when he's just Jacob. when he's just Jacob in the desert with his head on a rock? I think we got to ask ourselves this question. Listen, are we done dressing up? Are you done dressing up? Maybe not to trick your brother or your dad, but just trick other people so they know you're not crazy, but you really are, right? Because we're people. Are you done? I think the point at which we go, I'm done, and we may not even know we're done. God's like, now can I show you something? Can I show you that I'm at the bottom? Can I show you that it's not about all your effort or all your goodness? Like, are we ready to take off the mask and all this stuff? You say, well, that's good for Jacob, right? Because, like, you have to understand what we're talking about. We already are. Like, all of us are at some point Jacob in our life. We're all varying degrees of Jacob in this story. But maybe you're sitting here and you're going, okay, that's great. I'm glad that Jacob's got this. But by the way, my great-grandfather isn't Abraham. My great-grandfather's not even Isaac. It's not even Jacob. Like, I'm glad Jacob has the promises. I'm glad Jacob's got that relationship with God. Why in the world would you or anybody think that we can have that type of relationship? Because I haven't had a dream about a ramp. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure God's ever shown up to me. How can you stand there and say that the bridge that Jacob gets in the story is the bridge that you and I are offered? How can you say that? Who would have the audacity to say that? Well, the truth is, Christmas would. Christmas would. Because I think Jacob anoints a rock and is like, this is the place. And God's like, no, I'm with you. But he actually shows it to humanity at Christmas. There's an interesting story I just want to close with and talk you through. In the New Testament, in the biographies of Jesus, one of the followers of Jesus recounts a story of when they first found out about him. So Jesus, in his early ministry, is in Galilee, which is a town not too far from where Jacob is. And he's going, hey, I'm here, and I'm bringing good news that God has built a bridge to you and me. And one of the disciples, Peter, goes to his brother Andrew, and he's like, hey, we found the Messiah, the anointed one, the Christ. We found where heaven and earth meet. And Andrew's just like, really? He runs, and he goes to tell his buddy, Nathaniel, okay? So this is how this is working. God calls Peter goes Andrew. Andrew goes, hey, I'm going to go and tell this dude, Nathaniel. Nathaniel's chilling underneath a fig tree, okay? And Andrew shows up, and he's like, Nathaniel, we found the anointed one. And Nathaniel's like, yeah, from where? And he's like, Nazareth. And Nazareth is like a nowhere backwater town, like Hiram. Anyway, no, it's not. Sorry. That's cruel. That's not nice. If you're from Hiram, we love you. We kind of have to. Anyway, he shows up, and here's what Nathaniel says. Nathaniel goes, can anything good from Nazareth come? Like, no, nope. And Andrew's like, just come on. So Nathaniel gets up, and he goes to see Jesus, and Jesus looks at him and says, here is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. Here's what Jesus is looking at Nathaniel and saying, because eventually Jacob's name was changed to Israel. He goes, here is an Israelite in whom there is no Jacob. No tricks. Calls it like he sees it. And Nathaniel goes, what makes you think you know me? And Jesus goes, man, I saw you when you were under the tree. And he's like, you are the anointed one. And Jesus says this to him. He says, you think that's something? He actually addresses all his disciples. He says this. And he said to them, truly, truly, which is their way of saying, like, this is legit. I say to you, you will see heaven opened. Oh, like who? Like Jacob. And the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Who's he talking about? He's talking about himself. Jesus looks at the early disciples and he goes, guys, this guy is a true Israelite. He calls it like he sees it. And if you want to know something, he's not wrong. I'm the bridge. I'm the gate. Jesus is saying, I am God who's come down from heaven so that you don't have to earn it, so that you can see it, and so that you could understand that the God of the universe who holds his world is interested in you and me and wants to meet with us. That is the story of Christmas. And so as the band shows back up and we get ready to sing, I just point you to Christmas talking more about God meeting with us than really about all the decorations and everything else. In fact, at Christmas, some other people were out in the middle of the desert. They were shepherds, and no one would have expected God to show up to them. But you know what happens? The angels show up. And they said to them, don't be afraid, right? Like Jacob. For behold, look, we bring you good news of great joy, which shall be for all good people. Nope. For all Jewish people. Nope. For all people. For all the people. You and me. He'll go on to say, for unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Messiah, Christ, the Anointed One, the Lord. I wonder, are you in a desert? Are you in a desert? Christmas says that God has built a bridge for you. He wants you to see it. Do you understand it? Are you trying to make deals with God this morning? Are you someone who's like, I'm dealing with him on my own terms? Right? At Christmas, God goes, I'll show up as a baby. Not as someone who's going to stand over you and tell you what you did wrong. Because I think you know. I'm going to come as a baby and I'm going to grow up and I'm going to die for you so that you know this is the deal. Not whatever you got going on. Right? God speaks for himself. He does. That's why Jesus comes. Because he's like, I'm not comfortable with all you doing it. I got to go do it. I'm going to come and show up. And I want you to believe me, not your pastor or your church. I want you to believe me. That's what God, don't have a relationship with the church trying to have a relationship with God. Right? God doesn't live here. This is not the stone that's anointed. Jesus is the anointed one at Christmas. Have a relationship with him first. Please. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but that's the deal. Jesus is the deal. Unconditional deal. No ifs, no thens. God going, me, I'm right here. Trying to push him a little bit further away. Is that too close this morning? You trying to earn it? You trying to climb that ladder? Are you done? You done dressing up? And Christmas is for you. Right? Because some shepherds who stunk didn't have the right clothes. They're the first people God showed up to and said, hey, come and see where the bridge is. It's a baby. Bridge is a baby. Born for you and me. So I'm going to invite you to meet him this morning, not because this is a special holy place, but because he is a holy God. And he's everywhere. And the good news is if you've blown up his world, or your world rather, he has not blown up his. And if you need someone to do that with you, every week we say this, but we mean it. There's people who don't blab your stuff, who just want to be able to speak for you, to God, with you if you need it, to pray. They're available on the left-hand side of your room as we sing. No one's going to look at you. No one's going to make fun of you. Let's point you out. But if you need someone with skin on, they're there. Okay? Let's pray. God, we just go to you, and we can come to you not because we've built this morning a pillar of goodness. We don't stand on our good record. We don't even stand on all of these religious things that we put together. God, if we were to stand on a tower of anything, it would be all of the mistakes and junk that we've built in our life. Lord, there's some of us this morning who are at the bottom of that because we've tried to stack it, and honestly, it's just covered us. And Lord, I pray for those of us who that's us. Lord, would we see you at the bottom? Lord, thank you for the bridge that is Jesus Christ. Thank you for his death where we should have died. Thank you for his life so that we can live. God, we don't need anything that we bring to the table. We need what you've built in him. God, for the person who's here and they don't even know where to start, and maybe they're just waking up to you, would you tell them your good news again? Maybe for the first time hearing it. Lord, we love you. Lord, we love Christmas. Because in that event, you showed us who you are and how we can be with you. Thanks for meeting us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.